This is meeting number 12 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10th, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask except for members who are at their place during proceedings. I need to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking.
For those I'm not tall either.
For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those participating via Zoom, you have interpretation options at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French, and all comments should be made through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, and amended on March 21st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. As an individual, we have Andriy Shevchenko, and from Alberta Labour History Institute, Winston Gerlach, Treasurer, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Mark Agnew, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations, Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, Jaros Belan, Director, Kuhl Ukrainian Canadian Studies Center. From STAS, Louis Bouchard, the president, who I believe has not quite tuned in yet virtually, but will be joining us shortly. And from the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, Clayton Kolak, director. Welcome to you all. We will start with 5 minutes of opening remarks, and then we will proceed with rounds of questions from the members. Mr. Shevchenko, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, I have a personal note to begin with. As a former member of the Ukrainian Parliament and a diplomat, I apologize for breaking the dress code of this meeting. I have not worn my tie in the last 40 days, and I don't think many Ukrainians have done that, because of the Russian invasion and because of the war. I am a reservist officer right now, currently coordinating Media Center Ukraine, and I just want to reassure you that I'm deeply honored by this invitation, and I feel it is a very important meeting. I am in a very unusual position because on this 40th day of the Russian invasion, and just days after we learned about the Bucha massacre and other Russian atrocities, my heart screams to talk about the war, about the genocide imposed on Ukraine by Russia, to talk about the courage of Ukrainians and the genuine support of Canada. But it is also clear to me that if we want to overcome this, and we will, we must think about the future. We must think about how we can modernize the world in the future. And we do believe that freedom and justice that we are fighting for will be accompanied by prosperity and growth. And we want there to be with Canada. My message, Madam Chair, to you and to the committee is very simple. It is long overdue to modernize the Ukraine-Canada Free Trade Agreement. We have built a very impressive base for rapid growth of trade between the countries. The Russian invasion interrupted this, but I am absolutely sure that we will continue growth, and wherever it is possible, we should use every opportunities right now to remove barriers in trade. We need that to the benefit of our businesses. New opportunities under this agreement were found in the places where no one would expect. As of 2020, Ukraine bypassed Japan to become the third biggest buyer of Canadian fish and seafood. And at the same time, 25% of the apple juice supplies in Canada were coming from Ukraine. And we do have all the reasons to expect our trade to boost further once we modernize the agreement and extend it into services and investments. I can give you just one field of cooperation where we expect major growth, and it's the ICT sector. Ukraine is well known for its human talent in IT, and even today, as we speak, major Canadian companies rely on Ukrainian IT specialists. We do need to modernize CAFTA to make sure we meet all the global challenges. We need to go ahead with this to respond to the food security challenge caused by the Russian invasion. And let's think about the future. We will win the war. We will start a major recovery program. Whether we talk about enormous infrastructure procurement in Ukraine coming ahead, or whether we talk about new investment opportunities that the Ukrainian government is going to introduce, or whether we talk about enormous hunger for all sorts of supplies, we want to see Canadian companies benefiting from those opportunities. It will be good for Ukraine and it will be good for Canada. And also, let's see this as a part of a greater picture. We are building a space comfortable for our companies and for our extraordinary human talent. We should see this agreement working alongside with the excellent technical assistance programs, with amazing defense cooperation, great connection in the academics, people-to-people ties. And once we modernize the agreement, it should be accompanied by visa-free regime, youth mobility agreement, customs agreement. We are very close to building an exemplary foundation for mutual economic growth and cooperation. And I'll stop there, Madam Chair.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Shizinkas, for spending a few minutes with us here at committee and for those valuable comments. I think you know that all of Canada is just praying every day for an end to this terrible war and to stop the bloodshed. So it's very interesting to talk about the future and the free trade agreement and how we can make it better for the better future. So thank you again for being with us. Next, we have Mr. Gerlach, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I am honored to make a few comments to this panel on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. I'm the son of immigrant homesteaders who came to Alberta before the First World War. They came as children. And so, you know, the events in Ukraine have really occupied a lot of my attention for these years. I retired after spending most of my working life in industrial relations at both the practical level, working for trade unions, as well as at the academic level. And I worked a lot at the international level on projects involving labor law and sustainable development. I'm telling you this because I want to focus on the sometimes unpopular topic of labor standards. Labor provisions in the new free trade agreement must ensure that workers in Ukraine are well protected against some of the negative effects of liberalization that has been taking place since independence, and in particular after its leaders turned trade policy towards the West. I'm aware of some of the challenges facing workers and trade unions in Ukraine because I continue to receive accounts about reforms its government has been pursuing. I am naturally loath to criticize a nation and a government that is defending itself against an attack. So much so that for a while I thought I would withdraw my intervention. But I'm going to proceed on the presumption that Ukraine will survive and that it'll emerge as an independent nation. I guess otherwise, if it does not, and God forbid, all would be lost in academic. I would primarily suggest to this panel that you follow up on reports made by Ukrainian trade unionists, their central bodies, Ukrainian NGOs, the International Labour Organization, and such other international organizations as the European Trade Union Confederation about the way workers in Ukraine are being impacted by changes in labor law, as well as administrative action or inaction on the part of the government of Ukraine. George Sandel, a lawyer with the Ukrainian Workers' Rights NGO Labor Initiatives, is definitely one who should be consulted. There are others. They will tell you that changes introduced by the Ukrainian government in the last 2 decades work directly in many cases against the rights of workers and their trade unions, and that Chapter 13 in the 2017 agreement has done little to change this. Many of the negative developments in Ukraine occurred after it joined the WTO in 2008, when apparently it stepped up the liberalization of the economy, and proceeded with privatization of state-owned enterprises. Along with this was the growth of a gig economy in which large companies are apparently taking advantage of tax breaks and a mismatch between very high skill levels of Ukrainian workers and the low-paying jobs that are offered. Also, a highly vulnerable workforce because such a large percentage is undeclared or informal and lacking any protection under labor law. A new law introduced just before COVID could actually make matters worse, according to my sources. Canada should not be part of any agreement that contributes to a neoliberal economic strategy that sacrifices labor standards. I know none of us want that. Trade policy does not just affect the economy, it impacts the quality of life. Unfortunately, the Washington consensus is still alive and well, and most policy is still premised on a supposed disconnect between trade and the protection of labor rights. I secondly suggest that you make the strengthening of worker rights in Ukraine to levels prescribed by international labor law a prime objective of any future labor agreement. This will only happen if strong enforcement procedures are in place, and for this I recommend the labor provisions that were negotiated into the United States Mexico-Canada agreement, which replaced NAFTA in 2020. It was given very high marks by the Canadian Labour Congress for several reasons, but primarily because it was brought into the main body of the text and made the provisions enforceable through a detailed state-to-state dispute settlement process in Chapter 31. It would be a step forward and could be a model. Finally,
your closing comments. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I will. I suggest that any future free trade agreements in Ukraine be based on a positive approach to workers in which they're viewed as partners and not adversaries in any plan to rebuild the economy. I had a few comments to make about that based upon Canada's experience with the Wagner Act in the United States after the New Deal, but I won't make them because I don't have time. So in closing, I would like to say that the world has seen too many attempts by governments to promote prosperity by joining a worldwide race to the bottom. I don't believe that's the plan in Ukraine. I would like to see Canada take a strong stand against this trend when it goes to the negotiating table for a new agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gerlach. Mr. Agnew, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, Chair and honorable members, it's a pleasure to be back at committee, and thank you for having me. I want to say at the outset, the Canadian Chamber's profound shock at the human tragedy currently unfolding in Ukraine, which is certainly nothing short of a strike against the international norms that underpin our democratic societies. And through the chair, I'd like to express our sympathy and solidarity to Mr. Shevchenko and everyone in the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people that are currently there right now. In the few moments available, I want to cover both what the conflict has meant for Canadian businesses as well as what we should do on the path looking ahead. Besides the obvious geopolitical uncertainty that has been disruptive for Canadian businesses, there are a number of specific impacts that have arisen from the conflict. Foremost among these has been the aggravation of inflationary pressures on companies. According to the most recent Canadian survey on business conditions, half of businesses expect rising input costs to be a challenge over the coming 3 months, which is up 8% from the previous quarter. And this includes what we've seen on the impact, for instance, of commodity prices in a variety of products across the market. There are also the impacts that we've seen on commercial shipping through the Black Sea. Recent reports from various media outlets have highlighted work by Turkey, for instance, to disarm mines in the Black Sea, and certainly there's more reports of other mines that have been placed there. And put simply, this places commercial shipping at risk both today and certainly even in the future after the conflict ends. And certainly, as reported in the media, there are also a number of companies that have pulled back their operations from Russia. And the Canadian Chamber has also made its contribution by ceasing to issue certificates of origin for Canadian exports that are bound for the Russian market. The committee's motion of March 21 asked what we should be doing in response to the conflict from an economic standpoint. I would like to mention 5 items briefly today. First is sanctions symmetry. Sanctions mean that Western countries will feel pain in order to do the right thing. Therefore, Canada should continue to press our allies to ensure that they maintain a high standard and consistent approach in the applications of sanctions within their domestic frameworks. Second, the federal government needs to continue to ensure a clear and regularly updated flow of guidance to businesses. We are certainly in a fluid situation. I'd like to acknowledge the tireless work of the Trade Commissioner Service to keep up with the flow of announcements, and I urge the TCS to continue to do so to provide companies with the latest information. Third, Canada should actively support efforts to ensure safe navigation through the Black Sea for commercial traffic. Fourth, we need a better integration between our defense policies and our defense industrial policies. This conflict has underscored the importance of a strong defense industrial base, and an increase in investments in defense will certainly need to be done wisely going forward. For instance, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity with the modernization of NORAD, where we need to see stronger government-industry collaboration. Finally, we also need to increase our efforts to contribute to global energy security. The path to net zero only becomes feasible with access to a wide range of energy sources, and we have to step up to the plate if we want Europe to reduce its dependency on Russia. There is equally an opportunity in our critical mineral sector as the world turns away from Russia, but we need to build up more robust supply chains domestically. In closing, what is happening right now is nothing short of a seismic event whose implications are yet to be fully understood. The conflict presents serious choices for the government, parliamentarians, and businesses, in addition to all of our allies. More than ever, Canada needs to project strength at home and abroad, and there is a genuine chance to be a leader on the global stage. I want to thank the committee for initiating this timely study and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agnew. On to Mr. Balin, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having been privileged to be present at the July 2016 signing of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement in Kyiv, and after having earlier followed for several years the progress of the CIIT negotiations, in my capacity as the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress's representative on the Canada-Ukraine Advisory Committee, I'm happy to share some of my thoughts on the two motions being put forward in relation to the study of modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. First, I would like to say that as a proud Canadian of Ukrainian descent, who has always been concerned about the fate of his ancestral homeland, I was thrilled to see Canada take steps to expand its trade relations with Ukraine by opening up sectors in both economies to a freer flow of goods and services. Canada has been a stalwart friend of Ukraine since it achieved independence in 1991, committing millions of dollars and extensive human resources to myriad projects, providing invaluable practical support for Ukraine and to facilitate the development of its democratic institutions and free market economy. While all of the aid provided by Canada over the years has been important and hugely influential, notwithstanding challenges and setbacks met along the way, particularly in the realm of combating corruption, the fostering of improved trade relations with the negotiation of CIIT has been especially significant for three reasons. First, it recognizes that helping Ukraine to achieve greater prosperity is critical for its long-term stability, which in turn is essential for maintaining regional geopolitical stability. Secondly, it contributes to Ukraine's further integration, culturally as well as economically, into the family of Western nations. And thirdly, because CIIT serves as a symbolic vote of confidence in Ukraine's future by laying the groundwork for continued engagement. It sends a strong signal to Putin's Russia and the world at large that Ukraine is, was, and always will be, to refute a notorious Russian chauvinist formulation from Tsarist times that seems to have acquired new currency in Moscow. Some 5 years after CIIT first came into effect, it makes sense that it is time to review the original agreement with the aim of possibly updating its scope and some of its provisions. Changes happen quickly in the modern world, and they've been especially accelerated in Ukraine since the 2014 Euromaidan, or Revolution of Dignity, initiated a generational change in Ukraine's political establishment. Although the modernization initiative was launched in advance of the 2022 Russian invasion that has wreaked havoc on Ukraine, it is nevertheless useful to examine the impact that CIIT has had so far and to identify possible options for improving trade with Ukraine, which statistically remains relatively modest. Assuming the Ukrainian side's willingness to participate in a CIIT modernization process, I think it is important for discussions to proceed despite the turmoil that has been unleashed by Russia's unprovoked military assault and large-scale violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. The business of governing Ukraine cannot be allowed to stop completely, lest Russia be seen as making Ukraine look ungovernable with its current authorities. Obviously, the widespread destruction wrought by Russian forces on Ukraine's infrastructure and the brutal toll being exacted on the Ukraine's civilian population and armed forces will pose enormous difficulties for any short-term implementation of a modernized trade agreement. Nevertheless, it is critical at this juncture to show confidence in Ukraine's ability to withstand Russia's aggression and to be prepared for the time when Ukraine emerges from this dark chapter in its history. In terms of expanding the study to include the examination of possible economic repercussions that the increased sanctions on Russia will have for countries standing in solidarity with Ukraine, it follows that improving trade with allies of Ukraine could help to mitigate some of the collateral damage caused by the punitive measures being directed at the Kremlin. At the same time, improving trade with Ukraine's friends can not only benefit Canadian exports abroad by expanding our trade relations and opportunities, but also help to draw Western allies closer together at a time of growing crisis in the international order. Finally, knowing how long it can take to reach agreement on complex issues related to trade, undertaking a study in the present circumstances is a constructive first step toward creating the conditions for addressing what lies ahead in what are sure to be major changes in the landscape of international relations. I therefore support both resolutions adopted by the Standing Committee and look forward to learning the results of the study to be undertaken. And I will have other remarks, of course, in the discussion that is to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Bouchard. Okay, Madam, is that, no?
Not logged on. He had some
Okay.
technical difficulties. I will inform you as soon as he's
Okay.
able to log on.
That's fine. Then we will go on to Mr. Kodlak, please, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, members of the Standing Committee on International Trade, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Hello, Dobry den. As a farmer of Ukrainian heritage, the current incursion by Russia is very sobering. My grandparents immigrated to Canada from Ukraine under eerily similar conditions in the 1920s. Fleeing genocide, which began to be inflicted on the Ukrainian people and culture by others from Moscow, by orders from Moscow, is very sad to watch it all happen all over again. My grandparents would wonder if we've learned anything from history. I recognize that the 2017 CIIT is not an old document. However, given current circumstances, it is appropriate for this committee to study the agreement. We've all witnessed the Russian scorched earth policy of the territory of Eastern Ukraine. Normally at this time of year, Ukrainian farmers would begin to plant their crops. Instead, the farmers are working the land in a very different way, defending it, protecting it, offering safe passage to those who are fleeing, and towing a broad range of Russian military equipment away from their invaders. I don't profess to be an expert on the ins and outs of this particular trade agreement. Early research shows that the trade of goods and services has risen for both countries. That sounds like a win. Given the damage being inflicted upon Ukraine, this committee may wish to consider how best to support the Ukrainian economy. Unless the war ends within a few weeks, the Ukrainian crop will not be planted, likely placing millions at risk for food security and shortages. In other words, another Holodomor. The starvation of the Ukrainian people in the 1930s is remembered by every descendant. And while the circumstances are somewhat different, the outcome could be equally devastating. It's mind-boggling that a country that was only a few months ago a net exporter of wheat and sunflowers and other agricultural products is now potentially facing famine. I know through the Canadian-Ukrainian Trade Ukrainian Trade and Investment Support Project that agriculture products are listed as one of the top commodities exported from Canada to Ukraine. Ukraine will need both short and long-term support. In the short term, emergency food will need to be provided directly to Ukraine and likely the surrounding countries for Ukrainian refugees. Food security is something that Canadians take for granted. Ukrainians have as well, yet today, catastrophe seems imminent. In the long term, Canada can and should assist with agriculture equipment, seed, and crop inputs to remove bottlenecks in the Canadian grain transportation system with a focus on the Port of Vancouver. And 3, create an environment to establish nitrogen fertilizer manufacturing independence. The Western Canadian Wheat Growers believes that this is how Canada can play a significant role in reestablishing a vibrant Ukrainian economy. Canada has the expertise, and given significant lead time, we will be able to assist with many needs of Ukraine as it suffers from the Russian invasion. Thank you. Dякую.
Thank you very much, sir. All right. We will go on to members for questions, and if Mr. Bouchard is able to access it, we will give him his 5 minutes at a different time. So I believe we have Mr. Baldinelli for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being with us this afternoon. And thank you for your presentations. I'd like to begin by directing my comments to Mr. Agnew with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and just looking at some of the particulars itself with the agreement, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. And possibly if you could provide some additional information with regards to the sectors of Canada's economy that is benefiting from this agreement, and if you could further elaborate on that. I understood, and then Mr. Shevchenko had mentioned about fish products, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more.
So I have to, confess for the honourable member that, this is an agreement that we haven't heard a whole ton from our members on in a broad-based, sector association way. And it is admittedly a bit of a smaller market for our companies, but certainly, some of the sectors that Mr. Shevchenko alluded to are ones that, have stood to benefit. And I think also to, people that are in the manufactured goods and some other agriculture products, I think have also seen a bit of an uptick, but I would have to triple check the numbers on that.
Thank you for that. And then maybe I'll direct it to Mr. Shevchenko and Mr. Balan, who had made some comments with regards to the agreement itself. And I was just wondering if they could talk about some of the beneficial areas in the trade sector that, where both countries benefit tremendously.
Well, we usually speak of Ukraine as a country of brains and grains, and it tells you about something about our trade priorities. But my point is that actually, in the case of Canada and Ukraine, we still have quite low numbers of trade, which is, if we look at the numbers and if we think about Ukraine, which is a 47 million strong market, and if you think about Canada as one of the G7 economies, we'll see that trade as of the moment is peanuts. I think it's quite obvious that there is a huge potential to grow. And if we think about the future fields of success, then I would definitely look into the ICT sector. Ukraine is definitely known for this enormous human talent when it comes to IT specialists, and I would be happy to talk more about that if there is interest for that. And also public procurement. And if we think about this major future recovery operation that Ukraine will be going through, I think that opens enormous opportunities for Canadian companies, which will choose to participate in this major infrastructure procurement operations.
Thank you. Roland, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
You talked about the modernization of the agreement. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on particular sectors that you thought could benefit?
Well, obviously, Ukraine has a tremendous brain trust. I mean, our institute's involved with the academic community, and we know that Ukraine has a very highly educated workforce with lots of skills, and that some of them are already participating in the worldwide economy. Some of those people have now left the country and are working from outside of Ukraine because of the circumstances, but that obviously is, in terms of its intellectual capital and investment in it by Canadians, I think offers one area that of potential growth. Former Ambassador Shevchenko is right that trade levels, even though they've improved, are still very modest considering the size of the two countries. So there is potential for growth. And I think especially now in the rebuilding process that's going to have to follow this war, there's an opportunity, obviously, for Canadian investment in Ukraine and for developing the relationship further. But I suppose one of the challenges is that Ukraine exports products that Canada also exports, grains and cereal grains and agricultural products in particular. So we're competitors on one level, though Ukraine's markets are quite specific.
Well, thank you for that. And just building on that, and it was to comments from Mr. Kotelik from the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, and the whole aspect and the implications of Ukraine not being able to get its wheat to market, and what we can do not only as a nation but an additional wheat growing country, how we can assist and what can be done by those nations, our Western allies, to assist. Because, like he had indicated, we could be facing some severe food shortages. Kotelik?
Well,
a brief answer, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the export of Ukrainian products not happening at this point. I mean, that leaves tremendous gaps in global trade, in particular Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. We have to do everything we can to keep our products rolling into those areas, because it's not just Ukraine, it'll be the surrounding countries that depend on Ukraine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. On to Mr. Varani for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank all of the witnesses for this very important testimony that you're providing. I want to specifically address some questions to Mr. Shevchenko. So, Andriy, first of all, дуже дякую. It's great to see you. Thank you for being here. I wish we were seeing you in different circumstances, my friend. Thank you for all of your service on behalf of Ukraine here in Canada and the important work you did over many years as the ambassador of Ukraine here. I enjoyed very thoroughly working with you. You mentioned that Ukraine is the country of brains and grains. I would actually add a third moniker to that to give it a natural hat trick, Andriy, which is it's a country also of brawn. So brains, brawn, and grain, because clearly you've shown with your courage what your country is capable of in terms of standing up to Russia. And you have all of our unanimous views similar to yours about Bucha. We just passed a unanimous consent motion in today's parliament about the massacre at Bucha. Andriy, we've been stepping up in ways that I thought I'd never see, to be candid, in terms of incredible military assistance, an immigration program, humanitarian aid, sanctions against no less than 700 entities and individuals, including Putin and his inner circle, including Belarusians, aspects of the SWIFT system. The list is long. What I wanted to ask you about is that in terms of sort of taking this next step with the trade agreement, where you see sort of specifically, you mentioned ICT a couple of times, where we can harness that. And I know that what I've learned in the time that I was there, and you entertained me with others in 2018, things like such as cyber warfare and the knowledge you have on the ground in the IT sector and how to deal with cybersecurity in Ukraine. Is there potential collaboration that we can see in that area with the expansion of CIIT? So over to you, Andriy.
Well, Mr. Virani, thank you so much for the way you care about Ukraine and for this very precise and thoughtful question. Yes, I'm absolutely sure that Canada can and will benefit from this very close cooperation with our ICT sector. And I can give you just one number. Today, when we're in the middle of this war, 89% of the Ukrainian ICT specialists are fully paid in terms of their salaries. That means that even under these absolutely tragic and difficult circumstances, they keep doing their work. Most of them complete their contracts, mostly coming from North America, from Canada and from the United States of America. After they are done with their everyday job, they go to unload humanitarian cargo, or they do cyber war, protecting Ukraine from cyber attacks of Russia and fighting back. And I'm telling you this in such details just for you to imagine how this IT sector of Ukraine, how strong it is, how resilient it is, and how sustainable it is. those people, it's not just about brave Ukrainians and very professional Ukrainians. I think it's priceless when it comes to partnerships and to business contacts. We want Canada to greatly benefit from this partnership. You're in a very good position for that.
Okay, thank you, Andriy. And just building upon that, and maybe I'll work Mr. Agnew into the conversation a little bit. I find it, frankly, a little bit sort of puzzling because everything we're learning about the impact of the various measures we're taking is that it's having a crippling impact upon the ruble, upon Russian interest rates, or, on defaults, etc. And yet we're seeing sort of this disconnect between the impact it's having on the Russian economy and the nature of sort of what's happening on the war front. Can you explain that sort of disconnect? Is it you know, a speculative concern is that Russian people are hurting and Putin is just ignoring it. But if you could just walk us through sort of what impact the sanctions are having and how do we translate that impact into a direct consequence on the war? So maybe Mr. Agnew first and then Mr. Shevchenko after.
So I think part of it is that, you know, the sanctions do take time to work. The impacts are not felt instantaneously. I think particularly if you're looking at currency reserves, you know, as I understand it, the Russian government does still have some of its reserves at its disposal. And of course, there's the reality that not every country has placed sanctions on Russia. I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of large markets that have not gone down that route. I mean, Canada, NATO, and the Western Alliance has done it. But for as long as you have countries that are willing to do business, you know, with Russia and not place sanctions, then there's going to be an additional funding route for the Putin government.
Andriy, if you could add to that.
Two thoughts, Arif. First, those sanctions, they do work. And even before the invasion, there had been tremendous impact. In 2013, GDP per capita in Russia was about $16,000 annually. In 2021, it was $10,000 per capita. So 40% less for every Russian. So it is working and it will work in the future, and the sanctions do take time. The other thought is very simple. Putin is in many ways not just the source of the problems that we face. He is a reflection of the Russian society. He is the reflection of the Russian elite and of the Russian wide population. That means this threat is existential, not just for us, and it will stay with us for decades or maybe for generations to come. That is why we have to do sanctions very seriously, no time for half measures. And thanks to Canada for being a true leader in bringing this international coalition together.
Thank you. And I know Minister Joly has been working
Mr.
tremendously hard on this. I believe I had 9 seconds, Madam Chair, but thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andriy. Thank you, Mr. Agnew. I had my timer on, Judy. Thank you.
Good. Well, what you can get in 9 seconds, go right ahead. Okay, Mr. Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, would it be possible, given that our guest witness, Mr. Bouchard, is having problems, can I trade my turn with the another questioner? If it doesn't work, I will change my questions. I'll ask questions of another witness, but this way we can avoid losing time.
Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to follow up with regards to cybersecurity, Mr. Shevchenko, one of the things that we've had here on the Hill, and we'll actually have again, is Ukraine interns. I think there'll be another group coming in right now. But there seems to be a lot of young people that have good qualities and capabilities that could be part of cybersecurity for the future. Is that something that you would agree with? We've probed this a little bit before, but I think that's one of the things that we could really enhance, not only just for military operations, but also for banking, public institutions, and other types of vulnerable infrastructure from attacks, whether it be from Russia or elsewhere.
Well, I think it's very interesting and very important that we focus so much on the human capital when it comes to Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement, and I think it's a very fair approach. And when it comes to Ukraine, Ukraine is number one in terms of literacy in the European continent, and that explains a little bit about why we care so much about human capital and about its labor rights. But when it comes to ICT cooperation and the IT sector, I think that, yes, Canada is in a very good position to benefit from this cooperation. And in particular, because of excellent technical assistance programs that Canada has been working on with Ukraine. You have invested a lot into creating very good business contacts, business networks between Ukraine and Canada, and that will pay off.
And from that, actually, Canada has a program called Coding for Veterans to help Afghanistan veterans actually go through that. It's a working model where we've been quite successful. Do you think that there would be, interest from individuals to take up such a program? So what ends up happening, without getting into too many details, is actually they're enrolled in a program, and the program is sponsored by the government, and they get into cybersecurity training that leads them to the private sector, and their former military individuals are also there if they've been a family member in the military before. And so they go through this about a one-year process. They get paid for it, and then they actually become professional cybersecurity authenticated from the Ottawa University and other universities. Is that something you think there would be an uptake for Ukrainians if there was a mission developed on that or some type of program?
Yes, and on a broader scale, I have a feeling that Canada, when it comes to services, Canada undertrades with Ukraine. There is a huge potential wherever you take a look.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next question I want to ask is just in general, with regards to other nations that we can help, offset some of the negative consequences from the different types of sanctions that are taking place. Does anything kind of come to rise stronger than anything else in terms of a sanction that's affecting a neighboring country of Ukraine, or whether it's Poland or somewhere else, that is something that's low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that Canada could do to improve our actual access to markets and support them to help yourselves? I'll just put out there in general, I'm just looking for, is there any nation or products or services that we could help right away that would be low-hanging fruit, so to speak, easy to do right away for helping the citizens of Ukraine?
When it comes to sanctions, my short answer will be follow the money. I think Canada is doing very right thing when it goes ahead with all the sanctions that deal with financial institutions of Russia, with the sovereign debt, with SWIFT. You are doing the right thing, and I think we should continue. And yes, this is the way how we can put the proper pressure on the Russian economy. We should make sure that it stops and it cannot finance the war.
Thank you. Any other witnesses like to intervene? Okay. So I'll just one last question then. With regards to the oligarchs and the sanctions, would it be a stronger position for Canada to have a duration of time that there would be actual sanctions, or should we just leave them indefinite? Should we be looking at maybe 5-10 years, or a recovery period of the effects that they've had in terms of full recovery of, and then furthermore?
Well, I think it's so early to talk about that. I think we still need to do so much to make sure that we stop this war. And again, I have a feeling that that the nature of this war is not just about personal crazy steps by the leader of this country, but it's more about what the Russian public believes in. It makes it an existential threat for all of us, and we'll have to deal with this for decades to come. But I think the questions that you asked are very fair, but maybe we need more time to answer that.
Okay, and then I'll just finish with this and say, Madam Chair, since I've been doing this, the person that runs the Coding for Veterans Service said this is actually a perfect fit for training further Ukrainians with cybersecurity. So hopefully we can follow up on that possibilities. Thank you very much.
Wow. Sounds very exciting there. Monsieur Sevard-Tremblay, Mr. Bouchard has still not been able to connect. Do you want to go ahead now, or do you want to hold back?
Listen, I'll go ahead now. Maybe I could ask a question. If we don't have Mr. Bouchard, could he be invited for a further meeting if it's not working this time?
Given the interest in the committee, we will do our best if he is not able to connect to try to get him to be able to come for our next meeting.
Perfect. Unless he might be able to join us spontaneously soon. So I have a question for Mr. Shevchenko. Could you explain? You seem to know the sanctions that have been applied very well. You're saying that they are functional. Can you tell us what's been done in relationship to Russian banks?
Well, it is just very important to understand that in Russia, many sectors of the economy are used as part of the imperialistic state machine. And they are part of this major threat that we are dealing with. And that specifically refers to the financial sector of Russia. And there is an obvious major challenge of corruption, and there is a huge role of that specific financial sector when it comes to prosperity and to the safety for Putin, his environment, and for the oligarchs. That's why it has been so important to specifically target the financial institutions of Russia.
Ceci dit, on a eu vent.
That being said, we've heard, and I'm saying it's not huge, given that there is trade between Canada and Russia that's quite minimal proportionally, but we've heard several Canadian companies that were penalized by these banking sanctions. We heard about cases of transfers of funds from the client to pay the services that couldn't be done because of sanctions. I understand that these sanctions are necessary in such a situation of conflict, but you have an idea of how we might be able to mitigate these to not penalize Canadian and Quebec companies?
Well, first, I think it's very important that Canada shows an example to the world. Even when your trade with Russia is not that huge, and even when when impact of your sanctions are not as huge as we would like them to be, the example that you set to the world is very important. And it goes not just to the sanctions, it also goes to defense cooperation and to many other fields. But on a broader scale, yes, sanctions is the way how we can make the Russian economy suffer as much as possible. And if we are looking for some ways how we can compensate, I think CAFTA, modernized CAFTA, is one of the many tools we should think about. We should think and create some better, wider opportunities for our businesses in the future once we can stop this terrible war.
Pourriez-vous étaler un petit peu plus sur...
Could you give us more details on the use of this tool in the immediate term? Because we're talking about a business that's depending for a strong percentage of its activities that are with Russia. We're wondering, well, we meet these companies, and as elected representatives, we have to offer them plan Bs and come and help them in one way or another, because these companies just wanted to make business and didn't ask for the current situation. That wasn't their intention. But could you tell us a bit more about how we could use this tool to maybe minimize the effect or the consequences of these sanctions on these companies?
Well, first, I'm happy to say that Quebec and the Quebec companies have contributed into the success of CAFTA. And actually, you might be surprised to learn that Quebec was #1 in terms of provinces, in terms of its share in trade between Canada and Ukraine. But when it comes to the sanctions and to the overall effect, look, I think we do have to see the war which is happening right now as a global war. And if you think about the chemical attacks that Russia imposed on the NATO territories, if we think about the cyber attacks, including those that were in Canada, if we think about what Russian propaganda says right now, that they are challenging the West and they want to fight with NATO, I think we should realize that we are dealing with the global war. That means we should prepare our businesses for that. That means that that each of us will have to pay some price. And yes, we have to cooperate together to make sure that recovery comes as soon as possible.
Parfait. Madame la Présidente.
Perfect. Madam Chair, could you tell me how much time I've left, please? Or Madam Clerk? So listen, I have no further questions.
Bouchard a pu se connecter. Bon. Alors, est-ce que je peux rajouter?
So could I add my minute to further intervention and later, and we could hear Mr. Bouchard? Is this acceptable to you, Madam Chair?
We are going to do a sound check. I'm going to suspend for a moment while we do a sound check for Mr. Bouchard, and then he will have his 5 minutes to do his presentation. We will go to him for 5 minutes and then go back to Monsieur Savard Tremblay, who has 50 seconds remaining in his time. Okay, Mr. Bouchard, would you have 5 minutes, please, to speak to the committee?
Oui, alors, bonjour.
Yes, so hello, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure for me to be here speaking to you today on the topic of the impacts of the Russian-Ukrainian war and economic sanctions on my business, which is called STAS, in the Saguenay region of Quebec. I had a presentation, but because of the technical problems, I can't show you the slides. So STAS is a provider of high technology solutions and equipment for the global aluminum industry. We have our headquarters in Quebec, as well as a small business in France. We employ about 220 people with $60 million of business every year, and we work in 40 countries. Over the past years, we have provided more than 2,000 pieces of equipment and carried out tens of thousands of projects in the world. We're present in the industry of aluminum, from carbon electrolysis to casting centers, also in secondary processing. So we have experienced consequences of the global pandemic. Our business had decreased by more than 40%. So now we have sales of $35 million, so including $10 million with Russia, which represents about 85% of our exports outside of Canada. We have a global presence on all continents in North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Middle East. We are involved in many major projects in the aluminum sector in the world. Over 20 years, we've worked in Middle East, India, China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, as I'm going to tell you about today. We also have specialized and diverse employees. More than 125 people work for STAS in Quebec. This war has a major impact on us. First of all, the cause of the crisis was during the COVID period. Russia was our only stable market, and so we turned more and more towards that market. And then the second factor was that this crisis was sudden and unpredictable. The projects that we're working on usually take 18 to 24 months, so we're already we've been committed with our Russian clients for quite a while. The sanctions, the banking sanctions, prevent our clients from paying us for work that has already been done. And fourth impact is the interruption of transportation towards Russia. There's no more cargo shipping towards most of the between Russia and Western countries. And the final factor is that the supervision of these building projects in Russia. It's very hard for us to employ specialized employees to carry out the building of new machines and equipment, for the installation of these machines and equipment. We think that the impact on labor and production will affect our business over a period of 2 to 3 years. So it's a major crisis for us. And we have looked at the financial consequences of stopping those Russian projects to about $4.4 million. So that's making us lose several years of growth.
Okay. Mr. Bouchard, for your time. The committee is very anxious to ask you lots of questions. So, all right. And Mr. Savard-Tremblay, we are going to add your 50 seconds on to round 2, as you requested. So, Mr. Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
OK. Oui, bon. Excusez-moi.
So I'm sorry. Thank you to the witnesses, or the witness. Oh, things are not going very well for me today. Okay, yes. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Bouchard, I'm glad that you were able to be connected, because you are the executive president of a major company in my riding. So it's unfortunate what happened to you with your Russian contract, and we understand even more nowadays the risks that entrepreneurs take every day. Now, I want to know, first of all, concerning the viability of your company and the workers, what is the scale of the work in Russia? Mr. Martel, thank you for this question. So our operations in Russia, as I said earlier, are very important for us. We work on the Russian market. We've been working there for more than 15 years, and there will be major impacts after the sanctions and the Russian-Ukrainian war on the business's operations. We think that this can have an impact on 20 employees, or 20 jobs. Mr. Bouchard, I'd like to know if there were any efforts made on your part to diversify your operations geographically and take fewer risks. Well, Mr. Martel, STAS is a global business. We work on all 5 continents, and we serve a global market. The situation that we're in currently is that we were in the COVID crisis, and all of the markets were interrupted during that period. So we had Russia as being the only market that was continuing to function during this pandemic period of the last 2 years. So, Mr. Bouchard, do you know other businesses like yours that are in the same situation? There are very few businesses that we know that are in this situation. The export market to Russia and Ukraine is very small from Canada. So as far as we know, there are just a few businesses that are affected, but they are affected to a great degree. My next question is for Mr. Agnew. Mr. Agnew, you represent a large number of Canadian businesses. So I would like to know if you know businesses that have been experiencing the same problem as Mr. Bouchard's company.
Well, without getting to sort of specifics in a public forum, there certainly have been, a number of companies that have had issues both with an investment presence in Russia and those who had been doing business, and certainly seeking, payments in the current context has been difficult. And I think without knowing certainly the future pathway of sanctions, we anticipate that as time goes on, it will become more difficult for Canadian companies to receive payments, from Russian counterparts if they were to decide to keep doing business in that market.
Et Monsieur Agnew?
And Mr. Agnew, I would like to know, in that case, what do you tell your members who do business with Russia?
Well, I think that as much as, Canadian companies are always looking for opportunities to diversify, I don't think we should be under any illusions that, Russia, before its, military activity started in February, it was not a risk-free market by any means. I mean, there were already a number of sanctions that were, in place. I know that's sort of is a difficult, thing for any Canadian company that's gone through this disruption, but certainly it was a market that did have risk before the most recent outbreak of hostilities.
40 seconds remaining, sir.
Bon, OK. Alors,
All right. So I don't know if I have time. Mr. Agnew, again, in 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, the finance minister was Ed Fast, who had not offered help to Canadians who were suffering from Canadian sanctions. So in Russia, what would your recommendation be in this situation?
We are not seeking any financial assistance from the government towards Canadian companies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agnew. On to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much to all our presenters for all your testimony, and to our presenters of Ukrainian heritage. We certainly could hear the pain in your voice, and people all across Canada are with you. Whether you're Canadian or Ukrainian, we're with you. I think Canada has the second largest population of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine, after Russia. And Sault Ste. Marie has a number of them too, well established. A lot of them came over before IT and worked in the steel mill, and it was about labor. It was about people coming to work and sharing their skills with us. So I thank them for that. The church in Sault Ste. Marie, the Ukrainian church, is well over 100 years old, and we share that with you. So my questioning is going to continue on with the first part of it. Was going to be, since the invasion, we have sanctioned 700 individuals and entities in Russia for this unjust and illegal war. And on March 15th and March 24th, we furthered that and sanctioned, more Russians as well. At the beginning of it, we also served notice that we were withdrawing Russia's most favored trade status, and they're now in the same boat, I believe, with North Korea. They share that because Canada is a trading nation, and we continue to trade, which has resulted in a 35% tariff. So I'm going to start with Mark Agnew on the question. What other economic trade/sanctions do you feel that Canada could levy or consider against Russia?
Well, certainly there's a whole host of options that are out there. I mean, some of the ones certainly that I think have been talked about are further, sanctioning Russian financial institutions. I mean, as I understand, the current sanctions package is not sort of exhaustive in its coverage, if I can put it in those terms. And so certainly, that's been something that we've, been reading about in the public commentary that may be on the table at this point.
The former Ukrainian ambassador, your thoughts on that, please.
Oil and gas is another very obvious sector to go ahead with sanctions. And I think Canada should have a very strong interest in that. Because for decades, we saw Europe being heavily dependable on Russian oil and gas. And I think it's time to stop that. And just to maybe one more comment on the sanctions. I have a lot of sympathy to the Canadian companies which might lose some money with the sanctions. But listen, right now, when I'm talking to you, there is an airstrike, an air siren in the place where I am in. And that means that Russian rockets are flying here, and they're built on the tax money which were paid by global companies in Russia. I think we can all pretend that we can still do business as usual, but sometimes good contracts lead to terrible circumstances. So I think we just, all of us, all the good people and the good companies should finally correct the wrong decisions of the past. And I hope that there will be some good decisions for Canada to substitute the losses.
Well,
sorry for taking more time to answer this question.
And please stay safe as well. In 2020, Canada's Trade Commission Service suggested that CIIT had increased Ukraine exports to Canada by 6.5%. We've been talking about the numbers, and I looked up the numbers. So over the last few years, we've seen that CIIT has been very successful in increasing. So, how might this growth, and one of the things is when we enter into trade agreements with a certain country, then we also enjoy that country's position in their trade agreements too as well, and in a lot of opportunities. So how might this projected growth be impacted by the ongoing conflict and sanctions which are stemming right now, and which way has the Ukrainian economy been negatively affected, and do you anticipate an increase in Canadian exports to Ukraine following Ukraine successfully winning this unjust war? And if so, in what industries? I'll start with the former ambassador.
We will use this war to modernize our country in the future. This is our major chance to do that. And I hope that Canada and Canadian companies will use major recovery and rebuilding opportunities that will come with that. So I would specifically again mention public procurement. I think it's going to be major, huge. We need good Canadian companies. We need good Canadian contractors. We need good technology.
Thank you very much. Sorry, you got 1 second left. Thank you.
Can I add that to the 9 from Maruf?
And on to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 3.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Bouchard, I'm glad that you were able to connect yourself. I hope the connect is good enough and you can hear us clearly. Thank you for your testimony. I think we have to clearly say that these sanctions were necessary when there's such an aggression. Sanctions are needed, but we can also take a step back and see how we might be able to improve them. So you explained very clearly to us that you were in part victims of this because you depend 30%, which is a large proportion, on Russian businesses. So here we're the Committee on International Trade. We MPs meet several businesses who have this type of problem. So I'd like to ask you, what can we do for you? Thank you for the question. I think, just like you, that the sanctions were necessary, the sanctions against Russia. But I'd also like to draw the analogy when the Canadian government signs free trade agreements. There are compensatory measures that are put in this situation. So I think that with the sanctions against Russia, the Canadian government should adopt the same strategy as when there were free trade agreements with other countries such as the U.S., France, and others. And another means of compensation could be the same as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Some businesses have a greater impact than others, like ours. So the criteria is a loss of 25% of income. So we have more than a 30% loss with Russia. So that's very important. These are two examples that might be looked at in order to compensate Canadian businesses. And in your specific case, you imagine you have the overall picture of your business, and you imagine that these possibilities might be good solutions for you. Yes, I think this could be very interesting for us in order to help us get through this crisis. And I agree with the committee about the importance of the problem situation in Ukraine, but we also have to think about the impacts back home. So can you explain to us how the banking sanctions had an effect on you? The banking sanctions had a very brutal effect. Our client found itself in the impossibility of paying us for services that were already rendered in Ukraine. So we're in that situation. It happened very suddenly. So there's a problem. I see that, Madam Chair, is this to tell me that I have no more time? So, you had problems. The banking sanctions are a problem, and the logistics problems with transportation of merchandise. What's the cause? Well, the major global shippers have stopped bringing machinery to Russia and from Russia. Thank you, Mr. Bouchard.
Mr. Massey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Agnew, which financial institutions would be willing to share that probably should require further examination for sanctions?
I would need to follow up in writing with the committee on that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to switch over then back to Mr. Shevchenko. With regards to the oligarchs, and there's not just Ukrainian, there's Belarusians. Are there any others that are in our hemisphere? I mean, the oligarchs actually hiding and avoiding taxation is not a victimless crime without a war. It's actually a significant problem for this world right now. Do you have any suggestions to others that might be complicit with the Ukrainian oligarchs? Perhaps we have some in the Western Hemisphere that require some greater attention.
I'm not sure which Ukrainian oligarchs you specifically refer to.
Russian, I'm sorry. I said Russian. I apologize. But I'm looking for... Is there, without getting into specifics, do you think there's a connection with perhaps some that are from other countries that are probably unwilling to untie some of their business interests that they should be?
Yes, and I think in many ways now we have to do the homework which we have not completed in the previous years. So it has been necessary to do many of these measures a long time ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Massey. On to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be dividing my time with my colleague here, Mr. Elbochev. First of all, I just want to build on some of the questions and the issues that Mr. Bouchard had brought forward and raised. I'm new to this committee, and so you had talked about financial consequences, about $4.4 million at risk, and with your involvement in dealings with Russia. And I'm just wondering about the involvement and the role of the Economic Development Corporation and their program of insurance. I mean, looking at their site, it does, if a customer doesn't pay, they provide up to 90% of your insured losses. And now, was that looked at by the company as a means? I mean, you're talking about, creating new programs like Canadian Emergency Wage Program. But I mean, had the company, your company at all, STAS, had looked into support through Economic Development Corp?
Oui, tout à fait. Nous travaillons.
Yes, we work every day with EDC and their program, but unfortunately, because of political problems since 2014, EDC no longer insures Russia, so it was no longer a possible option for us. I want to remind the committee that the situation of our exposure to Russia doesn't come from a poor management of risk, but it's because it was the only market that was accessible to us during the pandemic crisis.
Helpful for us to know. Secondly, I'd like to go back to Mr. Shevchenko, and just looking at the importance of free trade agreements and future updates, and the importance the agreements can play in helping to assist in the urgent rebuild and economic support that's needed as we move into the future. And I was just wondering if you could provide a quick update and your thoughts on that.
Well, if we are talking about the recovery and the future rebuilding of the country, it's too early to talk about any specific numbers, but the numbers that I already can see, GDP decline range between $500 and $600 billion, and we are talking about 13% of Ukrainian roads being destroyed. So that pretty much tells you the scale of the work ahead of us. But also, we want not just to get what we lost, we want to modernize our country and to make it much better.
Now to my colleague.
Well, thank you to Mr. Shevchenko and to Mr. Agnew. The trade balance between Canada and Ukraine is very humble, although we have a trade agreement, and we're looking to modernize the agreement. There must be a reason why this trade relationship hasn't grown as opposed to, although nice to mention that the community, the diaspora here, Ukrainian diaspora in Canada is one of the largest, actually the second largest outside Ukraine. So it will be interesting to know, for the sake of this study, why we haven't been able to grow these relationships, the trade relationships. Mr. Shevchenko, and then Mr. Agnew, if you'd like to weigh on this, please.
Well, I think it will be fair to recognize that there have been some very obvious problems and challenges, and one of them was Ukraine had been fighting corruption for quite a long time, and only when, after the Revolution of Dignity, we introduced major changes in that sense, we were invaded by Russia, and that cut our economy by 20% in 2014, right away. But having said that, I think it's quite obvious that there is a huge potential ahead of us, and I think this is what we really should be focused on.
Mr. Agnew, I'd like to hear your Canadian perspective on this.
Okay. A brief answer, Mr. Agnew.
I think in addition to the points that Mr. Shevchenko raised, I would add 2 points. One is I think the geopolitical uncertainty that came out of 2014 with Crimea has lingered for Canadian businesses. And I think the second thing is also linguistic differences are always a challenge. Not many Canadian exporters have Ukrainian language capabilities, and that's always going to be a thing that holds them back. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Miao for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for everyone here today attending this important study. And my heart goes to everyone in Ukraine with the invasion. I'd like to address the following questions to Mr. Agnew. As Canada and Ukraine has a rich history and has been always supportive with Ukraine's development economically and both politically, in 1991, Canada became the first country in Western Hemisphere to recognize Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. And in 1994, Canada and Ukraine issued a joint declaration highlighting their commitment to strengthening bilateral cooperation, including in relation to international trade. So here's my question. Considering Canada's long history of supporting Ukraine and ongoing commitment to supporting Ukraine, do you anticipate any long-term implications for international trade? And can you expand on what these long-term implications would look like and how will they impact them? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I think there's a number of things to unpack, but in the short time that I have to answer the question, one point I would like to underscore that I mentioned in my opening remarks is transit through the Black Sea. Given there have been reports of mining through that passageway, and it is a fairly important thing for Ukraine's both imports and exports, I think that is something that will be an ongoing challenge. I mean, it's very risky right now to transit anything through the Black Sea, and even once the conflict ends, I think experience sort of shows there's going to be, for instance, an ongoing need to clear mines and ensure that there is a safe passageway through that. And, something that Mr. Shevchenko, I'm sure, could speak to in greater detail. The other piece of it, too, is that there's going to be a need to rebuild sort of, the basic, economic infrastructure in Ukraine. There's a lot of rebuilding that's going to have to happen, and certainly to resume trade, the domestic Ukrainian landscape is going to have to improve. So those would just be, two things, and certainly there are many others that we could point to as well.
And Mr. Shevchenko, do you have any comments to these questions?
I'll just would like to underscore the importance of the food security aspect of the situation. It's not just about the food security situation in Ukraine. Ukraine has been a player on the global market, and we already understand that there will be customers in Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, which will suffer from these broken chains of commerce.
Thank you. And considering that many Canadian companies are voluntarily pulling their operations and product from Russia right now, do you believe that this is an indicator that Canadian companies who continue to operate or fulfill contracts in Russia would see a negative reaction from Canadian consumer, which would negatively impact their bottom lines? Maybe I'll have Mr. Agnew to answer that.
Yeah, I think certainly if you look at the companies that have pulled out of the Russian market proactively, certainly that has been in response to not only the risk and the inability to get paid, but also I think the pressure and the expectations from their investors and their consumers. And I think you would have seen that particularly in the early days when a number of large, well-known multinational brands were beginning to withdraw from the market.
And would you say that generally Canadian consumers and companies have been supportive that way the government of Canada had responded to the unjust invasion and attack to Ukraine?
Yes, I would say on the whole that there has been a fairly broad-based support within the business community for the sanction measures that Canada and its allies have taken.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Shevchenko, do you have any additional comment to that?
I think we greatly appreciate these steps, both those that were initiated by the governments and those that were kind of like grassroots. And I think it also, in the 21st century, in good countries, governments do what the public wants it to do. And I think it goes a very long way for us to see how wide public reacts to the events in Ukraine. And we are very grateful to Canadians for care about events in Ukraine and to support us. So again, with the businesses, we greatly appreciate it. And I think they just follow the mood, they follow the intention, they follow the passion that the wide public has. Thank you for that.
Great,
okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mio.
Great, thank you.
On to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses this afternoon for your testimony. We certainly appreciate it. I just have 4 questions, Madam Chair, and I do want to say to Mr. Shevchenko, as did my colleague, Mr. Virani, earlier on, our hearts are definitely with you all. Mr. Shevchenko, you had mentioned earlier on that your labor force, and I apologize, sir, I want to say you said 82% or 89% was still retained, and if my numbers are a little bit off here, I apologize, but I believe it to be true that about 4.5 or so million Ukrainians have fled, and I quite frankly don't blame them. I wonder, Mr. Shevchenko, how has that affected the labor force in Ukraine?
Dramatically. Well, that specific number, 89%, was for one sector, which is IT or ICT. And that just tells you that we cherish our good IT specialists with their laptops just as much as our brave warriors with the weapons. But when it comes to the labor market in general, As of the moment, up to 15 million Ukrainians out of 47 had to change their location. It's the biggest relocation of citizens in such a short time in the history of Europe. There has been nothing in the history of the continent of this scale. Think about 15 million Ukrainians who had to change their location. Having said that, there are so many Ukrainians who, even under these circumstances, they try to do their work, no matter where they are at that moment. And when you look at the Ukrainians who had to flee abroad, they try to be useful there, they try to find job, and it's a very good example of how to behave in such a situation.
Thank you very much for the clarification on the numbers, Mr. Shevchenko, and back to you, sir, through you, Madam Chair, to the witness. So I'm just curious then, with regard to grain and an understanding that Ukraine is somewhat of a breadbasket, as is Canada, for the world's food supply. And just to stay on that line of questioning, what about the farmers then? And so if they're fleeing, how is grain being produced? And what about the labor market on our farms or on your farms?
Well, the farmers that are in the territories occupied by the Russians cannot do anything right now. The same goes for the battlefields. But in the other parts of the country, they have started their farming season, and we want them to do that. It's very important. And if we talk about the food security situation, there is a major destruction with the Ukrainian and Russian crops production, and also we should think about potash and about that part of the food supply chain. I think that creates some new opportunities for Canada, and I think it's a major global challenge that we should think together about.
Thank you, Mr. Shevchenko. Final question, Madam Chair, through you to the witness. I know farmers here in Canada are really feeling the pinch on fertilizers. If you can get it, you're paying a whole bunch more money. And so I'm just curious, sir, what about fertilizers for your farmers? What about just the grain to plant the fields? What does that look like, and what can we do to help?
It is a major challenge. In this part of the world, a lot of fertilizers and potash have been coming from Russia and from Belarus. And that is not the market where we would like to buy anything from right now. So it is a challenge. It is a global challenge. And again, I think it's one of the fields where Canada can be a very important voice.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. On to Ms. Dillon, please, for 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask my first question of Mr. Agnew. How does the Canadian government, how can it support other countries and their industries which were affected by the sanctions imposed on Russia? Could you give some examples of industries that were exporting to Russia and where Canadian industry might be able to do something to support Ukraine?
Question. I think the most straightforward answer would be actually in our natural resources sector. We have certainly a wealth of resources in the oil and gas industry, as well as critical mineral products, and those strike me as being, two areas where Canada should look to step up to the plate. Neither of them are short-term solutions. I mean, we need better infrastructure to get these products to market, but that would be an area that I would urge prioritization coming out of this conflict.
Merci. Monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. Bouchard, my next question is for you. I understand that you are having difficulties because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and because of the sanctions imposed on Russia following these attacks. In what other countries do you do business, and did these sanctions have impacts on your operations elsewhere? Which of these sanctions created the most problems for your business? I know there were 3 questions here. I'd like you to answer all those questions, please. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, Stas is a global business. We work in more than 40 countries. The sanctions against Russia had an immediate impact. It was the second time that we had a regime of sanctions having an impact on our operations. The first was in 2018 when there were sanctions against Oleg Pascat, the big boss of Rusal, an oligarch who's well known. And these sanctions were not affecting mines and metals sectors. The image has frozen. So in the sector of mines and metals, we often work in countries where the political regimes are different from ours, such as Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and China. So these are issues with which we're used to work. Thank you. And in response to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the members of the international community, including Canada, the US, the European Union, imposed sanctions on Russia. Certain analysts qualified these sanctions as the most complete set of multilateral economic sanctions ever applied to a large world economy. Can you tell us about the importance of the multilateral aspect of these economic sanctions and how this increases the efficiency of the sanctions? Thank you.
Who would you like to answer that question, Ms. Dillon?
What? Oh, Mr. Bouchard. Monsieur Bouchard.
For Mr. Bouchard.
Oui, sorry, désolé, je suis de retour.
Yes, I'm back. I'm sorry. So multinational sanctions have a very important impact. We have to comply with Canadian, European, and American sanctions, which greatly increases the complexity of continue our activities and make the costs go up, the costs to make sure that our business is in compliance. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Monsieur Bouchard.
Mr. Bouchard, I have the impression that you reached a conclusion that you needed to have a diversification of markets. Did you get the necessary support to do this, and what would you want in terms of support? Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Savard Tremblay. So yes, a diversification is needed. We're always on the lookout for opportunities. I think that STAS has a global footprint in the aluminum market, and we have to develop and have greater commercial presence in all these markets and also diversify with new technologies and new products. So it would require extraordinary help given the extraordinary circumstances in which we are today, which you have not received so far. No. No, not at all. Now, we see that the Canadian government's attitude is that Russia represents a very small amount of trade. We agree with this fact. But for some businesses, the impacts are huge, and we have to. These businesses that have major impacts must get some support. And did you look at the issue in a legal aspect? So any precedents of grandfathering clauses and things like this? We are looking at this sort of thing, and we're trying to keep our balance. We couldn't hear your last sentence because the connection's bad. Could you start again? We are looking at this to see what is possible in that way. So in this regard? Were you able to receive information? Did you ask for some from departments and other government organizations to find out more about this? We're trying to communicate with various departments. I think that the communication is difficult. No one seems to be assuming leadership within the government to see what the impacts are and how Canadian businesses can be helped. You talked about help for diversification of markets. Oh, I hear that my turn is over. Thank you.
Yes. On to Mr. Massey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could return to Mr. Agnew, just curious, with regards to the financial sector, and there's been some cooperation internationally. I'm just wondering about the, there's been a lot of attention, obviously, with oligarchs' yachts and stuff like that. But how do you have any idea how we're doing as nation states, being like Canada, the United States, with regards to, say, for example, the retail and commercial sector and financial services, whether or not we're matching up and aligning very well? I haven't seen any analysis to see whether or not we're actually kind of on the same stream of things with regards to some of the retail and commercial sector with regards to sanctions.
I mean, I haven't done a line by line because there's obviously a lot of individuals that have been, added to the list. But one area where I would say that Canada does need to up its game as it relates to the sort of individuals is we're calling beneficial ownership. I mean, this is something that's been talked about since, I believe, sort of 2012, 2013, if you were to go back to various kind of G7 communiques. And progress has been slow here because it does involve provincial jurisdiction. And so certainly that would be an area that, we need to do more work internally to get our house in order with federal provincial cooperation.
That is actually music to my ears. I remember on industry committee beneficial ownership, and I lost a series of amendments on that. Actually, we're actually almost a rogue state when it comes to the clandestine hiding that can happen with it. So I really appreciate that that commentary, because it really was evident, and we missed that opportunity about 5 years ago. So thank you, Madam Chair. That's all my questions, and I appreciate the witnesses on such a difficult day.
All right, Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'm going to split my time with my colleague. I just had one question. I wanted to follow up my one Liberal colleague had mentioned and ask some questions again to Mr. Bouchard, and just following up on my earlier questions with the Economic Development Bank, EDC, and the whole notion. And you had mentioned earlier about you've got about $4.4 million at risk. You had mentioned that EDC would no longer provide insurance after 2014. So I'm just wondering, the contracts that you're engaged in now, when were those entered into? Were they after 2014, after the period which EDC would no longer provide insurance? I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around some of that. If you could provide an answer on that.
Yes, that's the case. The majority of the projects that we work on run over a period of 2 to 3 years. So the projects that we're working on now were signed after 2014, so around 2018, 2019.
We're aware that you would not have the backstop of EDC providing any assistance or insurance for those contracts that you were going to go forward with from a risk management perspective. I just wanted to clarify that, and I'll just pass that on to my colleague now.
Well, thank you.
Oui, on était au courant.
Yes, we were aware.
Thanks, Mr. Mondinelli. The question to Mr. Agnew again. The sanctions could provide an opportunity for the Canada-Ukraine trade, and could also do the opposite effect. Will you be able to comment on this? Because I think it's very critical if we are planning to move forward, and hopefully the situation in Ukraine will settle soon, so we don't have to worry about that. But on the other side, we need to know what do you think of those sanctions affect, whether negatively or positively, on the whole trade relationship with Ukraine?
I don't believe that sanctions on Russian entities will have an impact on Canada-Ukraine trade flows. What I suspect we'll see is that, unfortunately, due to the conflict, trade between Canada and Ukraine will, collapse, and there won't be, very much happening just because of the market uncertainty. Now, I think that will start to increase, hopefully, when the conflict ends, regardless of whether or not the sanctions are still in place on Russian entities. Mm-hmm.
So you think we are well positioned on both sides to be able to do that upswing on a trade relationship?
Yes, I mean, not in the short term, because as Mr. Shevchenko said, there certainly is an active conflict ongoing, and there will be a need to rebuild. But I think once the domestic Ukrainian infrastructure it starts to be rebuilt, hopefully after the conflict does end, then we will see trade start to increase. But I think that still is a bit of a ways off.
Can you name just one factor that is going to really be a game changer in this whole thing?
I think hopefully the absence of a conflict. I'm not trying to be sort of glib about it, but I think when that conflict does end, then hopefully Canadian companies will see a reason to start to think about the market again.
So on the business and investment side, where's the hopes?
We do have the existing agreement in place. So again, I would look to areas, particularly in sort of the agriculture and fisheries, as being one area, because certainly Ukraine's own domestic food production is going to be affected negatively by the conflict, and so I think there's a risk of being frankly opportunistic about human tragedy. But I think if you look at sort of the economic realities, countries like Canada will have a chance to step in and help with Ukrainian food security coming out of the immediate aftermath of the conflict.
Chair, we have 30 seconds or more?
You have 1 minute.
Oh, that's good. So I'll continue. Now, the sectors that we can look to be very promising that we haven't tackled, I'm sure we are, as we are planning to move forward on this trade relationship, we must have a plan how to move forward and prepare ourselves, the business community, as well as the political and the governmental side of it. Which areas you think we can have most hope with to pick up the trade relationship further?
Again, not wanting to come off as opportunistic in a time of human tragedy.
Me either. I'm not trying to. It's very unfortunate that we're having this discussion, but the conversation is on the table, and we're trying to somehow modernize the free trade agreement.
So one area I think, for instance, is going to be in engineering and construction and infrastructure, services. Again, there's going to need to be a lot that's going to have to be rebuilt in the country. And I think if you look at where Canada has expertise, infrastructure and engineering is one area where I think there's a complementarity, if I can use those terms.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Chair.
much. On to Mr. Raya for 5 minutes, please. Be our last question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Mr. Winston Gerlach, you mentioned the labor issues in Ukraine and points taken. However, if you refer to the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, we have a chapter I think 13 on labor. Both Canada and Ukraine, we reaffirm our commitment to International Labor Organization, and we accept the rights of work principle and the rights of work that is adopted by ILO, and specifically we have considered all the aspects related to labor, whether abolition of child labor or abolition of forced or compulsory labor, or elimination of discrimination, or minimum employment standards. We have to accept such as minimum wages, overtime pay, and obviously the issues related to occupational injuries, illnesses, etc. Those things have been considered in the current agreement. However, there always scope for improvement, I agree. And if you have anything specific that you feel is left out in the current agreement that we can consider under the modernization agreement, please let us know. The time is limited for you to go into that. If possible, I'll come back to you. But please provide us in writing all the shortcomings you feel, or rather than shortcomings, or the things that can be considered in the modernization agreement. And Mr. Bouchard, I really appreciate the anguish the problem that you're facing. Canada, we are a trading nation. We don't have the, as a private sector company, I come from private sector company, came into politics. We don't have the luxury that we will trade only with other countries which are as good as Canada. For us to survive as a private company, as a country, we have to trade with almost everybody. We have to trade with non-democratic countries where authoritarianism is the rule, or sometimes we have to deal with the countries which are not, which are corrupt. Let's put that way very simply. However, we need to have the trade going and appreciate the problem you're in, and with respectfully have to disagree one of the witnesses' statement that you went to do business, you have a price to pay. I mean, that was the implication of the statement of one of the witnesses. Respectfully, I disagree. Whenever we have free trade agreement with several countries, the sectors affected by that agreement is compensated by the government of Canada. So I hope there is some mechanism where we can look into the issues faced by the countries which have been affected by the sanctions be considered. And Mr. Clayton Kotalak, Russia obviously is one of the, Russia and Ukraine both are exporters of wheat. I think Russia exported close to 30 million tons and Ukraine about 25 million tons. And obviously Canada is a big exporter of wheat. So wheat being a food commodity and which is very important for everybody in the world, it is going to make impact. The sanctions on Russia, the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which will affect the trade in wheat, and Canada is one of the major exporters. My question is, what is our capacity to grow wheat, or rather, what is the capacity utilization? Are we growing wheat to the maximum capacity that is available, or is there any more further potential available for us to grow and export?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for your question. Part of the there's always wiggle room to adjust acres, but part of what it means to be a farmer in Western Canada is you only grow one crop per year, and in that, just the given nature of that type of business, it forces you to play the long game. And when you are thinking in terms of one farmer's career where there's only perhaps 25, 30 crops, sustainability is of the utmost importance, and it has been that way since certainly since I've started farming. And what that really means, one of the biggest components to sustainability is crop rotation. So yes, there is room for adjustment in the production of wheat. However, we have to consider the situation perhaps a year or 2 years from now, where we may even be in a worse situation if this conflict continues, or perhaps if there's a globally wide drought. So although we can pivot, we're probably there's probably only about a 10% potential increase in the production of wheat in Western Canada.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that answer. To all of our witnesses, we know it's very difficult times, and we're certainly doing everything we can to assist the people of Ukraine. So to all of our witnesses, again, thank you so much for taking the time today, and to our committee members, thank you all very much. Meeting adjourned.